Heard enough. The Titan's voice, granite hard, ripped through the restaurant's hushed symphony. Around him, the loyal clientele pretended not to notice. A whisper, a dropped fork. That was all. He leveled a glare that could melt steel at the young waitress. Alara flinched, the phoenix ring, a miniature of her mother's, suddenly heavy on her wrist. 7 innocent words hung in the air, a truth bomb about to detonate. Turns out, what she didn't know was about to unravel a conspiracy 2 decades cold. They thought her just a server, invisible. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. But I know, and you will too. She was about to say 7 simple words. 7 words that would act as a key to a 20-year-old mystery, exposing a web of lies and unlocking a past buried so deep it was thought to be dead. What she said was an innocent observation, but it struck the billionaire with the force of a physical blow, leading to a collapse that would unravel everything. The air in Lyell was different. It seemed filtered, cleansed of the city's grit and desperation, leaving only the scent of money, seared scallops, and expensive perfume. For 20-year-old Alara Vance, it was a world she was permitted to serve, but never to enter. 6 nights a week, she'd trade her worn-out sneakers for polished black flats, her faded jeans for a starched black uniform, and her own identity for a polite differential smile. Her real life was a world away in a cramped 4th floor, walk-up in Queens, where the air smelled of boiled cabbage and her mother's lavender-scented laundry soap. Her mother, Amelia, was the center of her universe, a gentle, fragile woman with eyes that held a permanent haze of confusion, as if she were always trying to remember a forgotten dream. For as long as Alara could remember, her mother had suffered from chronic fatigue and severe memory gaps, all stemming from a bad fall she'd taken long before Alara was old enough to form memories herself. Amelia couldn't remember anything before waking up in a hospital at the age of 25 with no ID and no past. They had given her a new name, and she had built a new small life. Their most prized possession, the only link to a life before the fall, was a ring Amelia wore on a silver chain around her neck. It was a peculiar, beautiful thing, a sterling silver band intricately carved into the form of 2 phoenixes, their fiery wings interlocking to cradle a single dark blue teardrop sapphire. Amelia said it felt like a part of her soul, even if she couldn't remember who had given it to her. For the ring represented the great mystery of their lives, a beautiful solitary clue in a case with no other evidence. Tonight, Era's section was graced by a titan, Alistair Sterling. He was a man who didn't just exist in the world, he reshaped it to his will. Sterling Industries was a global behemoth with interests in technology, shipping, and real estate. Newspapers called him the Howard Hughes of his generation, reclusive, ruthlessly brilliant, and trailed by rumors of a personal tragedy that had hollowed him out years ago. He sat alone at a corner table overlooking Central Park, a ghost at his own feast. He was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. He exuded an aura of such immense power and cold grief that the other waiters avoided his table, leaving him to the new girl. Ara approached with practiced calm, her heart thumping against her ribs. "Good evening, sir. May I get you something to drink to start?" Alistair Sterling didn't even look up from his phone. Whiskey Malin 25, neat. His voice was low, growly, and dismissive. Throughout the service, he was the perfect picture of icy indifference. He ate without tasting, drank without savoring, and looked through Ara as if she were made of glass. She was just a pair of hands that refilled his water and cleared his plates. As she served his dessert, a deconstructed tiramisu, her hand trembled slightly and her cufflink brushed against his. He finally looked up, his eyes narrowing in irritation, but his gaze didn't land on her face. It snagged on her wrist. On the fine silver chain, she wore a gift from her mother for her 18th birthday. Draped over her pulse point was a small, delicate ring, a perfect miniature replica of the one her mother wore around her neck. Her mother had it specially commissioned from a jeweler in Chinatown using the little savings she had. So a piece of their mysterious past would always be with Alistair Sterling's fork clattered against his plate. The sound was like a gunshot in the hushed dining room. Every muscle in his body went rigid. His face, already pale, was suddenly drained of all color, leaving a ghostly ashen mask. His piercing gray eyes were fixed on the tiny ring on Era's wrist, a look of raw, unadulterated shock contorting his features. He wasn't looking at a piece of jewelry. He was looking at a ghost. The silence at the table stretched, becoming heavy and suffocating. Ara froze her training, screaming at her to apologize, to retreat, to become invisible again. But she couldn't. She was pinned by the intensity of his stare. It wasn't anger, it was something far deeper, something shattered and agonizing. His eyes, wide with disbelief, finally lifted from her wrist to her face, truly seeing her for the first time. He scanned her features, her dark wavy hair, the shape of her eyes, the slight curve of her lips with a desperate, frantic energy, as if searching for a familiar face in a crowd of strangers. Confused and a little frightened, Ara felt a nervous energy bubble up inside her. She needed to say something to break the terrifying spell that had fallen over the table. She gave a small, uncertain smile. "It's a beautiful design, isn't it?" She began, her voice barely a whisper. She gestured with her wrist. "The tiny phoenix is catching the light." Wanting to connect, to humanize herself beyond being just a servant, she added the 7 words that would change everything. "Sir, my mom has the same ring." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat. For Alistair Sterling, that heartbeat lasted an eternity. The carefully constructed fortress he had built around his heart for 2 decades crumbled to dust. The blood drained from his face and his breath hitched in his throat. "What? What did you say?" He rasped, his voice, a broken thing unrecognizable from the cold baritone of moments before. My mother repeated her confidence, faltering under his intense scrutiny. "She has one just like it, only bigger. It's her most prized possession." Alistair's hand shot out, not to grab her, but as if to ward off a spirit. His fingers were trembling violently. His gaze was no longer on the ring, but locked on Ara's eyes. A storm of emotions swirling within them. Pain, confusion, and a terrifying burgeoning flicker of impossible hope. "Your mother," he stammered. The name was a question, a prayer, a demand. "Her name? What is her name?" Before Ara could answer, his body betrayed him. His eyes rolled back in his head. A strangled gasp escaped his lips, and he slumped forward, his head hitting the table with a sickening thud, scattering the delicate dessert. He then slid sideways, his large frame collapsing bonelessly from the chair and onto the plush carpet with a heavy final sound. Panic erupted. The hushed elegance of Liel was shattered by screams. The manager, a perpetually flustered man named Jean-Pierre, rushed over, his face a mask of horror. "Call 911. Someone call an ambulance now." Staff and patrons swarmed the table. Era was shoved aside, stumbling backward. Her mind was a whirlwind of chaos and terror. One second she was a waitress making small talk. The next, a billionaire was unconscious at her feet. What had she done? What had she said? The image of his face, the raw agony in his eyes just before he fell, was burned into her memory. As paramedics swarmed in, strapping Alistair Sterling to a gurney, a stern-looking man in a tailored suit who had been dining at another table took charge. This was Marcus Thorne Sterling's lawyer and closest confidant. He barked orders into his phone, his face grim. His sharp eyes scanned the chaotic scene and landed on Ara, who was being questioned frantically by Jean-Pierre. "What did you say to him? What did you do?" The manager hissed, his career flashing before his eyes. "Nothing. I mentioned my ring," Era stammered, holding up her wrist as if it were evidence. Marcus Thorne overheard. He strode over his presence, silencing the manager instantly. He gave Ara a long, calculating look, his gaze lingering on the tiny ring. He didn't say a word to her. He simply pulled a business card from his wallet and pressed it into Jean-Pierre's hand. "Find out everything about her," Thorne commanded in a low, steely voice. "Her name, her address. I want it on my desk in the morning, and make sure she doesn't go anywhere." Then he was gone, following the gurney out into the night, leaving standing in the wreckage of her own life, the tiny silver phoenixes on her wrist, feeling impossibly heavy, like the weight of a world she never knew existed. The next 48 hours were a blur of anxiety for Era. She was immediately put on indefinite leave from Lushel. The unspoken message clear. She was a liability, a problem to be managed. The incident was all over the financial news. Billionaire Alistair Sterling collapses. The headlines screamed. They cited stress over work, a possible cardiac event. There was no mention of a waitress or a ring. Era had been scrubbed from the official narrative, yet she felt like the central figure in a drama she didn't understand. She spent her days in the small Queen's apartment, tending to her mother, Amelia. The news of a billionaire's collapse was a distant rumble of thunder to Amelia, who preferred her quiet world of books and potted plants. Ilara watched her mother tracing the familiar lines of her face, listening to her gentle, slightly detached voice, and tried to connect this fragile woman to the violent reaction of the most powerful man she had ever met. It was impossible. Her mother was Amelia Vance, a woman who found joy in a perfectly steeped cup of tea, who hummed off key while watering her African violets. She wore the phoenix ring on a chain tucked under her blouse, a secret treasure close to her heart. When Ara asked about it again, Amelia just gave her a sad, wistful smile. "I don't know where it came from, my love," she said, her fingers tracing the interlocking wings. "But when I woke up in that hospital, it was the only thing I had. It felt like an anchor. It felt like home, even when I didn't know where home was." On the third day, the summons came. It wasn't a phone call or an email. It was a black town car, sleek and silent as a panther, that pulled up in front of their crumbling apartment building. A man in a driver's uniform knocked on their door, holding a hat in his hands. He politely but firmly informed Ms. Ilara Vance that Mr. Thorne requested her presence. It was not a request. The ride downtown was a journey into another dimension. The car's leather interior smelled new and expensive. The city's noise was muted to a distant hum. Ara felt small and out of place, her worn cardigan, a stark contrast to the polished world she was entering. She was taken not to an office, but to the penthouse floor of the most exclusive private hospital in Manhattan, a place where the wealthy came to heal in hotel-like suites. Marcus Thorne met her at the elevator. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and had the unnervingly calm demeanor of a man who handled billion-dollar crises before breakfast. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice neutral. "Thank you for coming. Mr. Sterling is awake. He has requested to see you." He led her down a quiet carpeted hallway to a pair of large wooden doors. A security guard stood impassively outside. "He is still weak," Thorne cautioned. "The doctors have stabilized him. It was not a heart attack. It was a shock, a severe psychological shock." Ara's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't understand. What did I do?" Thorne stopped and looked at her, his gaze analytical. "That's what we're hoping to find out. You mentioned a ring, one that belongs to your mother. Mr. Sterling is intensely interested in it. Before you go in, I need you to understand something. The man you're about to see has not been the same since his wife Leanna died in a car accident 20 years ago. He is a man living in the past. Be mindful of that." He opened the door and ushered her inside. The hospital suite was larger than her entire apartment. It had panoramic views of the city, but the blinds were partially drawn, casting the room in a dim, somber light. Alistair Sterling was not lying in bed, but sitting in a large armchair near the window, dressed in silk pajamas and a robe. He was hooked up to a discreet IV drip, and a heart monitor beeped softly, a steady rhythm in the quiet room. He looked older, more fragile than he had in the restaurant. The icy armor was gone, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. His eyes, though, were burning with a desperate intensity as they locked onto hers. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice raspy, "please come closer." Ara approached cautiously, feeling like she was walking toward the edge of a cliff. He gestured to a chair opposite him. She sat her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "The ring?" he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You said your mother has one." Ara nodded, unable to speak. "Where did she get it?" he pressed, leaning forward, his entire being focused on her answer. "She doesn't know," Ilara said softly. "She's had it as long as I can remember. She has amnesia from an accident. A fall, she called it. It happened over 20 years ago." Alistair's breath hitched. He closed his eyes, a wave of pain washing over his face. An accident. He whispered the words like a bitter taste in his mouth. He opened his eyes again, and they were glistening with unshed tears. That ring, I designed it. There is only one in the entire world. I designed it for my wife, Liana, for our first anniversary, the twin phoenixes rising from the ashes, a symbol of our love. I put it on her finger myself. He took a ragged breath, the beeping of the monitor quickening slightly. She was wearing it the day she died. Her car went off the Bixby Bridge in California. They never recovered her body from the ocean, only fragments of the car and her belongings. But the ring was never found. He looked at Era, his gaze so filled with a desperate, impossible hope that it was physically painful to witness. "Miss Vance," he pleaded, his voice breaking completely. "Please, I have to see it. I have to see your mother." The air in the hospital suite grew thick with the weight of 20 years of grief. Ara stared at Alistair, her mind reeling. Liana. The name echoed in the silent room, a ghost summoned by the mention of a ring. Her mother was Amelia. The names weren't even close. This had to be a mistake, a tragic, painful coincidence. "Sir, Mr. Sterling," Ara began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Truly, but I think there has been a misunderstanding. My mother's name is Amelia. Amelia Vance, not Liana." A Leicester flinched as if she had struck him. The flicker of hope in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a profound confusion. "Amelia," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. It was foreign, meaningless to him. "No, that can't be. The ring. That ring is a part of her soul. It's a part of mine." He leaned back, his energy seeming to drain away. The heart monitor beeped a little faster. Marcus Thorne, who had been standing silently by the door, took a step forward, a warning look on his face. "Perhaps this is too much," Thorne said, his voice low and firm. "No!" Alistair shot back, waving him away. He turned his focus back to Era, his eyes pleading. "Please just tell me about her. Your mother, this accident. When was it?" Where Era felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. "I don't know all the details. She doesn't either. It's all just fog to her. She remembers waking up in a small community hospital in a town called Harmony Creek, a few hours north of San Francisco. It was about 20 years ago. The nurses there were the ones who named her Amelia. She had no eye to no memory of who she was or how she got there. They said she was found on the side of the road after a supposed fall. Every word spoke seemed to land like a physical blow on a Leicester. San Francisco 20 years ago. His wife Liana had been driving back from a charity event in Carmel. The Bixby Bridge was on that route. Harmony Creek was a small town inland from that very stretch of coast. Harmony Creek, he whispered the name, tasting like ash. His mind was racing, trying to connect impossible dots. The official report had been so clear: a tragic accident, a car lost to the violent Pacific. He had spent a fortune on private search and recovery teams. They found wreckage, a tattered piece of her dress, her purse, but never her. The assumption had always been that the ocean had claimed her. Could it be possible? He murmured to himself, his voice filled with a terrifying mix of hope and fear. Could she have been thrown from the car? "Survived, sir." "With all due respect," Ara said, her protective instincts for her mother kicking in. "My mother is a fragile woman. She's built a quiet life, showing up and bringing up a past that she can't remember, that might not even be hers. It could destroy her." "I understand," Alistair said, his voice gaining a sliver of its former command. "I will be careful, but I cannot live another day with this question mark hanging over my soul. For 20 years I have been a ghost. I have been half a man. If there is a 1 in a billion chance that the woman who gave you life is the same woman who gave me mine, I have to take it." He looked at Marcus Thorne. "Marcus, get everything you can on Harmony Creek Community Hospital. Records from 20 years ago. John and Jane Doe admissions. I want names of every doctor, every nurse who worked there. Bribe them if you have to. I want to know who found her, who treated her." Thorne nodded, already pulling out his phone. "I'm on it." Alistair turned back to Ara, his expression softening. "Miss Vance? Ara, I know this is an incredible burden to place on you, but I am begging you. Let me meet her. Not as Alistair Sterling, the billionaire, just as a man searching for a ghost. I won't pressure her. I won't even mention the name Liana. I just want to see her, to see the ring. Ara was torn. Her entire life she had wanted answers for her mother. She had dreamed of a key that could unlock Amelia's past and heal the sad, vacant spaces in her memory. Now that key was sitting in front of her, dressed in silk pajamas, a man of immense power and profound pain. But what if opening that door released not healing, but a flood that would drown them both? Looking into his eyes, she saw not a titan of industry, but a man who had lost everything. It was a look she recognized, a quieter version of the same loss she saw in her mother's eyes every day. Okay, she finally whispered, her decision made. Okay, I'll talk to her. I'll arrange it. But we do it my way, quietly at our apartment. No fanfare, no lawyers, just you. A single tear traced a path down Alistair Sterling's cheek. It was the first one he had shed in 2 decades. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you. Ara left the opulent hospital and returned to the rumbling subway, the black town car having been dismissed. She felt like she was carrying a bomb in her hands, ticking down to an unknown explosion. When she got home, she found her mother asleep in her armchair, a book open on her lap. The silver chain with the phoenix ring was visible at her throat. Driven by a new frantic need for answers, Elara began to search their small apartment for anything, any clue from that time. In the back of her mother's closet, under a stack of old blankets, she found a small battered shoebox. She had seen it before, but had always respected her mother's privacy. Now she opened it. Inside was a collection of faded objects, a dried flower, a bus ticket to New York, and at the bottom a small yellowed envelope. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were 2 things. The first was a faded Polaroid photograph. It showed a much younger, vibrant Amelia, or someone who looked just like her, laughing, her head thrown back. Her arm was around a handsome young man with familiar piercing gray eyes and a jawline carved from granite. A young Alistair Sterling. They were standing on a beach, the wind whipping their hair, and on the 4th finger of her left hand, gleaming in the sun, was the phoenix ring. Air's breath caught in her throat. The second item was a plastic hospital bracelet, brittle with age. The name printed on it was smudged but legible. Jane Doe. The admission date was from 20 years ago. The hospital's name was printed in the small letters. Harmony Creek Community Hospital. The coincidence was gone. This was real. Her mother, Amelia Vance, the quiet, gentle woman asleep in the next room, was Liana Sterling. And Ara, the poor waitress from Queens, was the daughter of one of the richest, most powerful men in the world. The discovery in the shoebox sent a seismic shock through Ara's world. She sat on the floor of the closet, the photograph and the hospital bracelet in her trembling hands, pieces of a life she never knew she had. The woman in the photo was undeniably her mother, but she was different, radiant, full of a life and love that Aurora had only seen glimpses of. And the man beside her. He was the same man who had collapsed at her feet, a ghost haunted by the memory of this very woman. Her first instinct was to run to her mother to show her the proof, to shout, "You were Liana. You had a life. You were loved." But looking at Amelia sleeping so peacefully, she knew the shock could be catastrophic. Her mother's mind was a fragile tapestry. Pulling one loose thread could unravel the whole thing. The questions were overwhelming. If her mother was Liana Sterling and she had survived the crash, why was she declared dead? Why was she left as a Jane Doe in a small-town hospital when her husband was one of the most recognizable men in the country? Someone must have intervened. Someone must have wanted her to disappear. Meanwhile, Alistair Sterling, galvanized by a hope he hadn't felt in 20 years, had put the full force of his considerable resources into motion. Marcus Thorne, no longer just a lawyer, but a private investigator with an unlimited budget, descended upon the quiet town of Harmony Creek. Harmony Creek Community Hospital was now a modern medical facility, but 20 years ago, it had been a small, underfunded institution. Records from that era were paper filed away in a dusty basement archive. Bribes were not necessary. A significant donation to the hospital's new pediatric wing opened every door. Marcus and a team of forensic accountants began to piece together the events of that fateful week. They found the admission record for a Jane Doe brought in by a local trucker who found her unconscious by the roadside miles from the Bixby Bridge crash site. She had a severe concussion, multiple fractures, and crucially profound amnesia. She was the only unidentified patient admitted that month. The trail began to heat up when Marcus cross-referenced the hospital staff records with Alistair's personal and financial records from that year. He was looking for a connection, a link, however tenuous. He found one in the most unlikely of places, the hospital's head administrator. At the time, a man named Robert Finch, who had retired to Florida a year after the incident, citing a sudden lottery win. There was no record of Finch winning any lottery, but there was a record of a series of untraceable bearer bonds totaling $2 million being cashed by him. The bonds originated from a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands, a corporation that after days of relentless digging, Marcus Thorne managed to link to one person, Julian Sterling Alistair's younger cousin. The name hit Alistair like a physical blow, Julian. Always in his shadow, always smiling, always offering his condolences. Julian had been the one to manage the family's affairs in the immediate aftermath of Leanna's death, shielding a grief-stricken Alistair from the grim practicalities. He had been the one to confirm the wreckage, to handle the death certificate, to be the pillar of support. Marcus's team dug deeper, unearthing a pattern of embezzlement and fraud. Julian had been running inside Sterling Industries for years, siphoning off funds Alistair had been too grief-stricken to notice. Leanna, who had a keen eye for finances and had always been suspicious of Julian's sycophantic nature, had just begun an informal audit of the family accounts in the weeks before her accident. She had told Alistair she thought something was wrong, that millions were unaccounted for. Alistair, busy with a hostile takeover bid, had told her they would look at it together when he got back. He never got the chance. The horrifying picture began to crystallize. Julian knew Leanna was close to exposing him. The car crash was a godsend. But what if it wasn't enough? What if she survived a call to the hospital? A confirmation that an unidentified woman from a crash had been admitted. It would have been a simple matter for Julian to drive up to Harmony Creek. He would have found Leanna alive, but with her memory wiped clean. It was a golden opportunity, not to kill her, which would be too risky, but to make her disappear forever. A briefcase full of money for a corrupt administrator like Finch. Records would be buried. Leanna Sterling, the beloved wife, would be declared dead, lost to the sea. Jane Doe, the amnesiac, would be left to drift away into a new anonymous life, a ghost with no past. Julian's secret would be safe, and he would be free to continue plundering the family fortune. The architect of Alistair's 20-year-long agony was not fate or the ocean or a tragic accident. It was his own blood, his own cousin who had been patting him on the back at family gatherings for 2 decades. While Marcus was uncovering this web of deceit, was preparing for the reunion, she coached her mother gently. An old friend is going to stop by, Mom. A friend from before your fall. He thinks he might have known you. Please, just be calm. It might be nothing. Amelia was anxious but intrigued. The idea of someone from her forgotten life was both terrifying and tantalizing. She agreed, clutching the phoenix ring on its chain like a talisman. Alistair arrived that evening, not in a town car, but in a simple taxi that he dismissed a block away. He wore a simple sweater and slacks, looking less like a billionaire and more like a nervous man on a first date. He carried a small bouquet of white friars. Ilara met him at the door. Her favorite flower, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She always said they smelled like memories. Ilara's heart ached. She led him into their small, humble living room. Amelia was sitting in her favorite armchair, the lamplight casting a soft glow on her face. She looked up as Alistair entered. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Alistair's gaze devoured her, tracing every line of the face he had seen only in his dreams for 20 years. She was older, her hair threaded with silver, her eyes holding a sadness he didn't recognize. But it was her. It was his, Leanna. Amelia stared back at this handsome, grief-stricken stranger. She felt a strange pull, a flicker of something deep within the fog of her mind. a sense of familiarity so profound it scared her. Her hand went instinctively to the ring at her throat. Alistair saw the movement. He took a hesitant step forward. "Hello," he said, his voice a raw whisper. It's been a long time." The atmosphere in the small apartment was charged with a fragile, palpable tension. Amelia clutched the phoenix ring through her blouse, her knuckles white. She looked from the stranger's intensely emotional face to her daughter's worried one, and back again. "I'm sorry," Amelia said, her voice soft and hesitant. "Have we met before?" "You seem familiar," but she trailed off, a familiar frustration clouding her features. This was the story of her life. Faces in crowds, snippets of songs, scents on the breeze that all promised a memory that would dissolve like mist the moment she tried to grasp it. Alistair's heart broke and soared all at once. She didn't remember him, but she felt him. That was enough. It was everything. He followed Ara's rules, aiding in the tidal wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "My name is Alistair," he said, taking another slow step into the room. He held out the bouquet of frizzes. "I was told you liked these." Amelia looked at the delicate white flowers, and a genuine surprised smile touched her lips. She took them, her fingers brushing his, and brought them to her nose, inhaling deeply. Her eyes closed for a fraction of a second. "They're beautiful," she murmured. "They smell like a summer afternoon by the water, a flicker of a memory so faint she couldn't be sure it was real." She looked up at him, her brow furrowed. "How did you know?" "A lucky guess," Alistair lied softly, his gaze never leaving her face. AR brought a vase for the flowers, her movements quiet and deliberate, trying not to disturb the delicate balance of the moment. Alistair sat down on the worn sofa opposite Amelia's armchair, creating a space that felt both intimate and vast. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He simply began to talk. He spoke not of Lyanna Sterling, the billionaire's wife, but of a young woman he once knew. He told stories of her stubborn spirit, her terrible singing voice that she insisted on sharing her love for old black and white movies, and the way she would laugh until she cried at the stupidest jokes. He talked about a trip to Italy, a disastrous attempt at making pasta from scratch that ended with flour covering every surface of the kitchen. He described a quiet evening on a beach in Caramel, watching the sunset, where he gave her a ring shaped like two phoenixes, promising her a love that would always be reborn from any hardship. With each story, he painted a portrait of the woman she had been. Ilara watched her mother, her heart in her throat. Amelia was listening with rapt attention, her head tilted. She wasn't recoiling in fear or confusion. Instead, a strange sense of peace seemed to be settling over her. These stories told by this stranger felt more real to her than the 20 years of hazy, disconnected life she had lived as Amelia Vance. "That ring," Amelia whispered finally, looking down at her own hand, which was resting on her chest, holding the charm. "The man who gave it to her, he must have loved her very much more than life itself," Alistair said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "He still does." Suddenly, Amelia's eyes widened slightly. She was looking past Alistair at a small framed photo on the mantelpiece, a picture of a 5-year-old Ara on her first day of school. "You have a daughter," Alistair said, following her gaze. "She's wonderful. You did an amazing job. She's my whole world," Amelia said, her voice filled with a fierce, uncomplicated love. "When I woke up remembering nothing, I felt so empty. But then finding out I was going to have her, she gave me a reason to live. She became my memory, my anchor." The word anchor struck Alistair. It was the same word she had used to describe the ring to Ara. In that moment, he understood. Lyanna had survived pregnant and alone. She had given birth to their daughter and raised her in this tiny apartment, pouring all the love from her forgotten life into the one precious thing she had left. As this emotional reunion was unfolding in Queens, a different kind of confrontation was taking place across town. Marcus Thorne, armed with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, bank statements, sworn affidavit, and the confession of the retired hospital administrator, had arranged a board meeting at Sterling Industries. The official reason was a quarterly review. The real reason was sitting at the head of the table, a surprise attendee, Alistair Sterling, connected via a secure video link, his face a grim mask of cold fury. Julian Sterling walked in, smiling and confident, ready to present his doctored financial reports. He froze when he saw Alistair's face on the screen. Alistair, what a surprise. We thought you were still recovering, Julian said, his voice a little too loud, his smile a little too wide. I've recovered enough, Julian. Alistair's voice boomed from the speakers devoid of any warmth. Enough to finally look at the books, the ones Lyanna wanted me to see 20 years ago. The color drained from Julian's face. Marcus Thorne stood up and began to speak, his voice calm and methodical as he laid out the entire conspiracy. He spoke of the embezzled funds, the Shell Corporation, the bearer bonds, and then he delivered the final devastating blow. We have also uncovered a payment of $2 million to Robert Finch, former administrator of Harmony Creek Hospital, made the same week that a Jane Doe survivor of a car crash was admitted. A Jane Doe who, it turns out, was Lyanna Sterling. You didn't just steal from this company, Mr. Sterling. You stole Alistair's wife. You stole a mother from her child. You buried a living woman under a mountain of lies. The boardroom was silent, save for Julian's ragged, panicked breathing. His carefully constructed world had just been demolished. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Security guards entered the room, their expressions grim. Julian Sterling, the architect of 2 decades of pain, was finished. Back in the small Queen's apartment, the story of Lyanna hung in the air, a beautiful, tragic ghost. Amelia Lyanna was quiet, her mind a whirlwind, trying to connect the powerful feelings the stories evoked with the blank slate of her own history. The pieces weren't clicking into place like a key in a lock. It was more like the slow, painful return of warmth to a frozen limb. A tingling, uncertain, and deeply emotional reawakening. Alistair knew he couldn't force it. The fragile hope in the room was a butterfly's wing. The slightest wrong move could tear it. With a heart that was both fuller and more terrified than it had been in 20 years, he stood up to leave. I've taken up enough of your time, he said, his voice a raw whisper of emotion. Thank you for listening to an old man's stories. He turned toward the door, a maneuver that felt like the heaviest physical act of his life. Leaving her again, even for a night, felt like a betrayal. As his hand touched the door doorknob, Amelia spoke, her voice small but clear, cutting through the silence. The song? Alistair froze his back to her, every muscle tensed. What song? He asked, not daring to turn, not daring to hope too much. The one he would hum when she couldn't sleep. Amelia said, her eyes distant, looking at a space in the air only she could see. It was a lullaby from his mother. I sing it to Ara sometimes. I never knew where it came from. It was just there inside me. Slowly she began to hum. It was a simple, haunting melody, slightly off-key, but filled with an ancient tenderness. For Alistair Sterling, the world dissolved. The peeling paint of the apartment, the distant wail of a city siren, the very air in his lungs. It all vanished. All that existed was that sound. It was the melody his own mother had hummed to him as he fought off childhood nightmares. It was the tune he had whispered into Lyanna's ear on their honeymoon. A secret language of comfort passed from one generation to the next. No one else in the world knew it. He turned around slowly, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated astonishment. This was not a story he had told. This was not a memory he had shared. This was proof. This was her soul speaking, bypassing the broken pathways of her mind. Tears he had thought long dried up, streamed freely down his face as he crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt before her chair. The gesture was instinctual, an act of reverence, of surrender. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her, his heart overflowing with a mix of agony for the years lost and ecstatic joy for this single perfect moment. Lyanna, he whispered her name for the first time, not as a question, but as a statement, a prayer that had finally impossibly been answered. The name settled over her, not as a shock, but as a comfort. It felt right, like a favorite coat she had forgotten she owned. It felt like coming home. She reached out her hand, trembling, and gently, tentatively touched his tear-streaked cheek. His skin was warm, real. In that touch, in that shared melody, 20 years of separation dissolved into nothing. Her factual memory was not restored. The doctors would later say the trauma had damaged those neural connections permanently, but her heart remembered. The profound emotional truth of their love had finally broken through the fog. Ara watched them, tears of her own streaming down her face. She was no longer just the daughter of Amelia Vance, the quiet woman with a mysterious past. She was the daughter of Leanna and Alistair Sterling, the living, breathing embodiment of a love that had refused to die. The days that followed were a chaotic whirlwind. The news of Julian Sterling's spectacular arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and kidnapping by deception, coupled with the miraculous reappearance of his supposedly dead wife, became the biggest story in the world. Paparazzi, like vultures, sensing a feast descended upon their humble Queens apartment building. The flashes from their cameras were a constant strobing assault against the thin curtains, their shouted questions a violation of the quiet, anonymous life they had always known. Alistair shielded them from it all. He arrived not with a fleet of flashy cars, but with a discreet security team that cleared a path through the media circus with quiet, intimidating efficiency. He personally escorted Amelia and Ara from the crumbling walk-up that had been their sanctuary in prison into a new life. He moved them to a quiet, sprawling estate in Connecticut, a world away from the city's glare. It was a sanctuary he had bought years ago, but had never lived in a place surrounded by acres of rolling hills and ancient trees. The gardens were filled with thousands of white frizzes, a fragrant testament to a memory he had never let go. He brought in the best neurological specialists, not to fix her, but to help her integrate the two halves of her life. They explained that Amelia Vance was not a lie, but a real identity her mind had painstakingly constructed to survive an unimaginable trauma. The goal was not to erase Amelia, but to help her merge with the ghost of Leanna. She decided after much thought to be called Leah, a bridge between the two women she was. For Ara, the change was staggering. She went from rationing grocery money to having a personal chef ask for her dietary preferences. But the whiplash of wealth was secondary to the emotional upheaval of gaining a father. This powerful, intense man was suddenly focused on her with an attentiveness that was both wonderful and overwhelming. He wanted to know everything: her favorite books, her worst fears, her secret dream of being a writer. One evening, he found her curled up in a window seat in the vast library, scribbling in a worn notebook. She tried to hide it, embarrassed. He gently asked if he could read it. Trembling, she handed it over. He sat for an hour, reading her prose, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up, his eyes glistening. "You have your mother's soul," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and a talent that is all your own. This is remarkable, Ara." It was the first time in her life that someone outside of her mother had seen her, truly seen her, and the validation was a balm to a part of her heart she didn't even know was wounded. Slowly, cautiously, they began to build a new family. They had quiet dinners, not in a cavernous dining hall, but in a cozy breakfast nook overlooking the gardens. Alistair, a man who had taken his meals alone for 20 years, now found himself laughing until his sides hurt at Alara's wry observations about their new life. Leah, no longer haunted by a past she couldn't grasp, blossomed. The haze in her eyes was replaced by a clear, bright serenity. She and Alistair would walk in the gardens for hours, not always talking, but simply relearning each other's presence, their hands clasped together. While this fragile new life was taking root, the final act of the old one played out. Julian Sterling's trial was swift. The evidence was insurmountable. He was sentenced to decades in prison, a fittingly quiet end for a man whose crimes had screamed across so many lives. Alistair attended only the sentencing. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction in his cousin's downfall. Looking at the broken, bitter man in the defendant's box, he felt only a profound sense of pity and waste. His justice was not in a courtroom. It was at home in the sound of his wife's laughter. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year to the day that Laura had served him dessert at Lierloo, the three of them stood on a hill overlooking the estate. The trees were a riot of red and gold, and the air was clean and sharp. Alistair turned to the two women who were his world. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady, "I was a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life. I thought I had lost everything, but I was wrong. The best part of her was safe. The best part of her was with you, Alara. He looked at his daughter, his love for her shining in his eyes. You were her anchor. You kept her soul safe until I could find my way back. He then turned to Leah, taking her hands in his. And you, my love, you survived the unsurvivable. You built a life from nothing. You are the strongest person I have ever known. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside wasn't a new piece of extravagant jewelry, but the original Phoenix ring, which Leah had given him to be professionally cleaned and repaired. He slid it from its chain, and for the second time in his life, placed it on her fourth finger. It fit perfectly. For my wife, he said, for Leanna and for Amelia, and for the amazing woman who is both. He then handed a small leather-bound book to Ara. It was her own collection of stories, the ones from her notebook, which he had had privately printed and bound. The title on the cover read, The Phoenix's Daughter. Leah smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She squeezed her daughter's hand and her husband's. We found our way back to each other because of you, my love, she said to Ara. A mother's love, a daughter's hope, and a ring that remembered even when I couldn't. Ara looked down at the tiny replica on her own wrist, then at the real one gleaming on her mother's hand. It had been a simple, innocent observation in a restaurant, the utterance of 7 small words. But it had been the key that unlocked the past, exposed a villain, and reunited a family. It had allowed a love buried under 20 years of lies and tragedy to finally, like the phoenixes carved into its silver band, rise from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and finally together. This is a story that reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary destinies are hidden in the most ordinary of lives. A waitress, a billionaire, and a single unforgotten piece of jewelry, a testament to the fact that love and truth can echo through decades of silence. The bond between Alistair and Liana, and the daughter who unknowingly carried their legacy, proves that even when memories fade, the heart never truly forgets. It's a powerful reminder that we should never underestimate the small details, for a simple observation can sometimes unravel the greatest mysteries and lead to the most incredible miracles. If this story of love, loss, and reunion against all odds touched your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who appreciates a story of hope. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will move you, inspire you, and restore your faith in the unbreakable bonds of family. Click the notification bell so you never miss a single incredible